Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Global Read program with our guest author, Heather Malin, who will be discussing her book, Teaching for Purpose, Preparing Students for Lives of Meaning. I'm Kate Trinka, the Global Read Coordinator and the lead ambassador of the Charter for Compassion's Environment Sector. Our host for today's program will be Vicki Sekshevsky. But before I introduce them, allow me to tell you more about some other upcoming events and work of the Charter for Compassion who's bringing you today's program. And of course, we're always grateful for your financial support so we can keep bringing you programs like these and the ones that I'll be mentioning. We have several upcoming courses being hosted by the Charters Education Institute. In April, we're offering a course from John Smeltzer called Poetry for Inspiration and Well-Being. And in May, we'll be offering another round of compassionate integrity training. I also wanted to announce a campaign that is near and dear to my heart, the Compassion Tree Project. The Compassion Tree Project is an effort to bring awareness to the need for the regeneration of our planet. Our ambitious 10-year goal is to plant 7.7 billion trees, in effect, each tree representing every person on the planet. I'll provide links to these programs in the chat room. Speaking of the chat room, it's located at the bottom of your screen, so you can use that chat room to ask any questions that you might have of our guest today. And so please feel free to use that. Our next global read will be with Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer and their book, The Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. That happens on May 5th. And in June, we'll be visiting with Jean Shinoda Bolin to discuss her book, Like a Tree, How Trees, Women, and Tree People Can Save the Planet. And then in July, we're going to be featuring Joanna Macy with her recently released book, Wild Love for the World. I'll put the global read page in the chat room also. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you our guest host, Vicki Sekshevsky. Vicki, I hope I didn't totally mess up your name. Vicki is the founding education director of the Greater Good Science Center and is a contributor to Greater Good, the ASCD's Educational Leadership, Edutopia, and the Huffington Post. She gives talks and workshops all over the world and leads the GGSC's Summer Institute for Educators, which is an annual multi-day event in which education professionals learn how to enhance their skills and those of their students in the areas of compassion, empathy, gratitude, mindfulness, and other social emotional skills. She sits on several advisory boards and consults and collaborates with organizations on how to incorporate the science of well-being into education. Vicki's a former teacher and school leader who earned her PhD in education and positive psychology from Claremont Graduate University. And in her doctoral research, she spent 2 months in India at a school awarded the Peace Prize by UNESCO and the Hope for Humanity Award by the Dalai Lama, researching their methods for developing teachers' abilities to create caring relationships with their students. Welcome, Vicki, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's wonderful to be here.
And now to the reason that you're all here, Heather Malin's book, and Heather with her book, Teaching for Purpose. Heather is a senior researcher at Stanford University Center on Adolescence, where she studies diverse aspects of purpose development. She is the author of Teaching for Purpose, which we'll be talking about today, and has published research articles on purpose development, youth civic engagement, artistic development, and purpose among young entrepreneurs. Heather's research is driven by her desire to empower young people to transform society and create a better world. She's especially interested in how this research can be applied to education practice and is exploring ways that schools can support student purpose and what happens to schools when they make purpose a priority. Prior to her research career, she was a K-12 teacher and arts education program manager and provided training for pre-service and in-service teachers. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here, Heather.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be able to talk with you all today.
And just a reminder to those who've just joined us, if you have any questions for our guest today, please type them into the chat box below, and we'll be sending them to Heather later in the program. Now I'll tag this off to you, Vicki, and I'll let you know when it's time for any questions with our audience later in the program. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you so much, Kate. All right, Heather, it's wonderful to be here with you today.
Yeah, it's so great to see you and actually get to have a conversation. It's really Wonderful.
Yes, yeah. So why don't we just dig right in?
Sure.
Why don't we start, if you could just explain to us, what is purpose and why is it important? It seems to be a buzzword these days amongst teachers and high schools in particular, but can you explain a little bit about what it is and why it's so important in our lives?
Sure. So I think there's a lot of, there's an idea of purpose that's a kind of a layperson's purpose, understanding of purpose. And the way we define purpose, I don't want to negate anyone else's understanding of what purpose is, first of all, because we all do carry our own understandings of purpose. That said, we conduct research on purpose all the time and how it's developed. And so we do have a working definition that we use that I think helps to understand what purpose is and how we can kind of cultivate it and make use of it in our lives. So we define purpose as a stable and generalized intention to accomplish something that is both personally very meaningful and that contributes to the world beyond the self. So I want to break that down because that's a definition and in itself may not be very useful, but I think each of the parts can be very enlightening to understand kind of what role purpose might play in our lives. So first of all, it's a stable and general intention. And that means it's something that we intend. It's how do we intend to live our lives? Sometimes we talk about it as a specific goal or aspiration to kind of convey the loftiness that it has in our lives. But I also like to think of it as an intention of how to live that we can commit to. That reflects our values. And I'll get to that a little bit, but I want to go to this idea of it being stable and general. We sometimes think about purpose in the activities that we do, which is true, but really our purpose is that general driving central intention, I guess keep using the word intention, but it's generalized. It's this idea of we want to help others, or we want to solve problems in society, or we want to provide for our family. These general intentions might be realized in very specific ways, like helping, volunteering at a homeless shelter, or something like that. Or painting portraits, or something very specific that's unique to us. But the purpose is the intention that's very general, that kind of drives us through our life. So it's also meaningful to the self. And it's not necessarily a passion that we have, but it's something that we find that expresses or conveys or allows us to act on our core values, the things that are most important and that make us our best selves. I see the sun's changing, so it's getting a little different there. So it's something that's personally meaningful. It reflects our personal strengths. It's something that we can act on to make use of our personal strengths and be our best selves. The sun's rising. That's how it's going to be.
Yeah, it looks great.
Welcome, sun. Okay, and then the third part is that purpose is, it's motivated by a desire to contribute to the world beyond the self, or to be part of something larger than ourselves, to be a contributing member of something larger than ourselves. So that something larger than ourselves might be our family or our community or society. It's contributing to and being part of something that is beyond ourselves. Our purpose is why we're here. Why do we think that we're here, and what are we here to contribute to our world to make it better? So you asked about why it's important as well. And there are a few different ways to think about that question. On the one hand, we do research, we look at what other kind of outcomes is purpose associated with, and we find that it is associated with a lot of positive life outcomes, like better physical health and longer life. It's associated with lower stress and with greater psychological well-being. So we know that purposeful people are more likely to be psychologically and physically thriving. We also understand that we know that just from understanding the role that purpose plays in our lives, that it's a source of energy and resilience for people. So it's kind of this inner force that drives us when we don't know maybe which way to go, or if we're feeling either challenged or bored by the things that we want to be doing with our life. It's that purpose gives us the drive to keep going. And it also gives direction. So it's sort of like that North Star, or it can be that North Star that when we don't know, we can't see our destination or the goal that we're heading towards, we might find that purpose, that kind of central intention, allows us to figure out what the next step is and which direction we can go to keep moving forward in our lives and keep making progress. And then purpose is also important for society and the world, because the more that people are committing themselves to becoming their best selves and contributing in positive ways to their world, big or small, obviously the better off society is.
Great, thank you so much. It's really helpful. So I'm curious about examples of purpose. You talked about purpose being something that contributes to society, to making the world a better place, to being part of something larger than yourself. So I'm assuming an example of purpose would not be something like making a lot of money or getting into a really great university. So I'm wondering, can you give us what are some examples of purpose, and maybe some examples that might be as an adolescent and maybe as you get older in life, does purpose change? Sure. What might be some of those examples?
Right. So first of all, yeah, these are things that come up a lot, this idea of making a lot of money. That sounds like very self-oriented and not purposeful, going to university. And one thing I would want to say about those types of examples is we actually struggle a lot because those can be very beyond the self-oriented, purposeful goals. Someone coming from poverty, for example, who aspires to get a degree or to make a lot of money might be doing so because they want to provide for their family or give back to their parents who have taken good care of them despite difficult circumstances. So we're always very committed to asking people when we do research, why do you have that goal? Why is that your intention? Why is that important to you? Because that gives us a lot of information about whether or not that is actually beyond the self-oriented purpose and where it's coming from, where that drive is coming from. So that said, they're getting to this idea of examples. One thing that I find interesting is we see people finding purpose at different in different proximities or distances from the self. And so some people find purpose in family. Some people find purpose by having a family, or by providing for family, or by making their parents proud, or by creating strong bonds among their family members or friends or other relationships that they have. Some people find purpose at the community level, or kind of in a broader sense, neighborhood, town, or maybe an ethnic community. So we meet a lot of people who find purpose by getting involved with a religious or ethnic community, by helping the immigrant population that they're part of. And then still others find purpose by acting on really big problems in the world. People get involved with environmentalism, of course, or alleviating poverty, or by creating things through the arts, maybe, that change how people might feel or think. So, and none of these is better or worse or bigger or smaller. They may feel smaller or closer, but they're all a unique expression of our personal strengths and best selves. So, I mean, that's kind of an important idea of what purpose is. In terms of specific ways, we do a lot of interviews with young people, so we have a lot of examples of how young people, adolescents, find purpose, and this can range from very young teens might try to alleviate bullying. They see people being bullied in their school and they want to help those people, those other students, their peers. And so they'll find ways to do that, whether it's, we've heard students say, I just make sure to talk to someone who I know is treated badly in my school every day. Or someone might, another might say, I've worked on starting a program at my school that allows people who are feeling bullied to come together or find support. We hear more wide-ranging, or far-ranging. So a lot of young people, of course, think about their future careers, and they start working, now to act on that. We hear a lot of concern for animals, or someone has a family member who died of cancer, or who for some reason is concerned about a medical issue and has been involved in not just aspiring to in the future get involved in medicine and go to school. That's part of how they're thinking about their purpose. But they're also we hear about kids who are currently kind of playing with engineering ideas so they can see about developing a new prosthetic, and by using household materials to explore those ideas, or getting involved with organizations now that they can start to work on their purpose. So, purpose can be close, it can be far, it can be kind of off in the future, it can be now. We just see examples all over, kind of all over that field.
That's really exciting. I want to acknowledge the time that we're living through right now, because it's a global experience. Everybody, I don't think there's a single person on this planet whose life has not been affected in some way by the virus. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what is the relationship between purpose and significant events like the one that we're living through now. What might we expect? What might the outcome be?
Sure. So I love this question. I hate that we have to ask it right now. I know a lot of people might be experiencing significant challenges, anxiety, having experiences of loss through this time. And we actually have been there's a lot of research emerging right now that looks at the relationship between purpose and adversity. So it's actually fortuitous that research has been kind of percolating recently. It is unfortunate that we have to actually look at it, but so we don't know everything yet about this relationship, but we do know that there is a relationship. And what we've seen in our own research, and what I've seen in looking at other people's research, is that there is some kind of bi-directional relationship. And what I mean by that is we do see that we interview a lot of people, young and old, who do find purpose. It's like an adversity or a trauma or something very challenging that happens sparks purpose for them. And so that's, like the bullying example I gave. We've talked to quite a few young people who experienced bullying and were very traumatized by that. And their response to it was to help their peers who are experiencing bullying and find ways to do that. We also hear from a lot of young people who grow up in poverty or difficult family circumstances, who dedicate themselves to some kind of response to that. Now, that doesn't mean that someone experiencing adversity has to or will necessarily be narrowed in their purpose by what happened to them. But we do see that those kind of events do seem to go together. People who describe experiencing some kind of adverse event also describe purpose, or maybe the other way around is a lot of people that we talk to who have purpose can also describe some kind of significant event or adversity that is part of that whole purpose development. So in the other direction, we also know that from longitudinal research that people who had purpose previously existing are better able to have an emotionally resilient response, or to cope better with adverse events when they come up later in life. So I've been really interested in figuring out, why is there this relationship that seems to go both ways? And what comes to me is that there are some other underlying processes or capacities or qualities that are leading people to both develop purpose and to be more resilient when things come up. I have notes for those two things. One is that, so purpose is a beyond the self activity. It's kind of this commitment to, or drive to do something that contributes to the lives of others or beyond the self. And we also know that tending to the suffering of others is a way to build your own resilience in the face of suffering. And so we actually see that with our purposeful young people. Often they are they might be experiencing some kind of significant event or adversity or suffering, but what they're looking at is other people who close to them, especially, who might be either impacted by the same event or experience or circumstances, and their kind of drive is to help those other people. And that's how they kind of develop their own emotional resources to deal with it themselves. So we might see during this time young people who start aspiring to be doctors or nurses because they see that those are the people who are both kind of the helpers and the heroes right now, and they see that they're the ones who are, working to alleviate the suffering. So that's an example. So we also know that purpose comes from reflecting on, or one thing that provides a foundation for purpose is reflecting on our core values and knowing kind of intimately what our core values are and how we want to reflect those in our life. And we also know that by reflecting on our core values and who we are, we're kind of better prepared to reappraise those values and our life goals in the face of a big shakeup. So when some significant event occurs, one response might be to dwell on the negative aspects of that, or like kind of just dwell on how that's impacted us negatively. And how it's kind of shaken up our goals and not kind of move past that, but just say, my goals are gone. But people who have a growth response are those who can reflect on their values in the face of a significant event and reappraise, what are my values given this experience? How have they changed? And how does this affect my goals? And how can I move forward from there? What's the positive steps I can take from there without losing who I am, but kind of evolving who I am and growing from there. Mm-hmm. And so those are both, that's also related to kind of how purpose develops. So the third thing is that we see that purposeful people are often those who have a very positive and energetic and hopeful outlook on life. We do see that people who are very purposeful are also very energetic about life, and kind of, feel optimistic about what the outcomes of their actions will be. And so similarly, we see that people who are resilient in the face of adversity or significant events are those who have those qualities as well: positive outlook, hopefulness, and an energetic, proactive response in the face of adversity. And so it seems that the reason we see purposeful people also being more resilient is they have worked on perhaps cultivating consciously or not consciously those processes of kind of hopefulness and proactive response, positive response, and positive outlook towards the future.
Great. So it's amazing then to actually be talking about purpose right now with everything that we're going through. It's very, very timely. And, oftentimes when I talk in workshops about purpose, I find that many adults come up to me and say that they don't feel like they have a sense of purpose in their lives and they're not sure exactly what they can do. Yeah. And I'm also noticing on social media right now, and also just talking to friends and loved ones, a lot of people are questioning what this whole global event is going to do to our society, and how is it affecting us globally, but also how is it affecting us individually. And in your book, you outline a really beautiful process of how people, if they feel like they don't really know what their purpose is, or have a sense of purpose, what they could actually do to cultivate purpose in themselves. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that process.
Do that, sure. That process comes from both our definition, how we define purpose, as well as what we've seen in how people who are purposeful, what they seem to have in common. It's basically what I think about is identifying what are your core values. I mean, just being able to, which is it's not easy, but really taking, opportunities to reflect on what is really important to me and why is it important? What do I value most and why? And keep asking that why, and to kind of understand what that is, and then committing to intentions that reflect those values. So, one thing, and then acting on those intentions. So those are kind of 3 steps that I think about. So one is the reflecting on who am I internally and taking the time to do that. And there are lots of ways to do that. And then thinking about how that shapes your intentions for being in the world, whether that's the kind of person you want to be, or the kind of contributions you want to make, or the kind of problems that you see that you want to fix that reflect that understanding of yourself. And this is all very abstract. I think what's nice about having a book is that it's possible to kind of lay it out and like, now do this, so it feels very abstract to just talk about it, but these are activities that people do in classrooms, and just taking the time to do them is meaningful, and then acting on them, which is easier said than done. I actually find that that's my big obstacle in my own purpose, and so. We think, especially in the face of a big, significant event like this, I personally want to help everybody. I want to, there's so many big problems. People are losing their jobs, and some people are so anxious, and, the economy is really struggling, and people are losing loved ones. And I want to, I'm kind of all over the place wanting to solve all those problems. But I can't, I'm one person. And so I quickly lose sight of my purpose if I don't think about how I can, as one person, make small contributions. So I think that's one important thing to think about in terms of how can I cultivate purpose, is thinking about what is it I want to do and I can do that reflects who I am and who I want to be, and breaking it down into very concrete what I can do steps. So I can't get everyone's job back, but I can get takeout from a restaurant that I love, so I can make sure that that restaurant is staying alive as much as possible. Or I can make sure I'm going every week to, the food banks here are struggling because they've lost all of their volunteers. And so I can be that person who does that, because that allows me to act on that person that I want to be. So everyone will think about that differently, but if you have that kind of developed reflection on who you want to be and what your core values are, you can kind of refer back to that. So I would say reflecting on values, setting intentions to act in the world based on those values, and then finding realistic ways to do that, and recognizing that we find purpose by making small contributions, not by fixing the big, overwhelming problems.
It's great. That's very helpful, because it's so easy right now to feel like there is nothing that we can really do, just as you described. So thank you for that. So I'm wondering also, so that's about how we can cultivate purpose in ourselves as adults. What about young people, whether that's teens?
Yeah.
And in your book, it's really interesting. You talk about how we can actually work with very young children to help them on this path to purpose as well. Can you talk a little bit about both of those things?
Sure, and it's very similar, although I think when we think about being adults working with young people, there are other things that we can do. So first of all, starting with the question of what we can do with young people, like very young people, they might not have, we've seen purpose in really young kids. My boss and colleague, Bill Damon, when they started this work, they met like a 6-year-old who was really purposeful. So first of all, it's important to not discount what young people are capable of, but it is important to be aware of working with the child you have. And so, and honestly, before preteens, commitment is not going to be very strong. But what we've seen in the classroom environment and at home is that giving young people opportunities to talk about, asking big questions about what's meaningful in life. Young people can talk about what's meaningful to them and what matters to them, and using those opportunities to convey your family values and express how important those values are to your family. We've found that young people who are very purposeful look back to values that their family gave to them or that their church gave to them, because they had opportunities to really think about and talk about and reflect on those things. And those values, they lead with those values. And when they're talking about what's important to them and what gives them a sense of purpose, they lead with those values. So having opportunities from a very young age to just respond to open-ended questions about what's meaningful in life, what matters to you, just kind of makes that part of who they are. And so, we work with, or we've seen people working in high schools saying, we can do this great work with students, but we wish they had started having these conversations younger, because it takes a lot to get used to talking like that. So, just finding those opportunities to do that, I think, is really important. Some other things, I could go so many directions with this question, but I guess thinking about what adults can do when you're working with, whether it's your own children, one of the things we found really important is the role of role models. So this can happen in different ways. Being a role model of purpose or beyond the self activity, letting your child see you doing that kind of activity conveys that it's doable and that it's what we do, and gives them examples of how they can act in their own lives on whatever kind of intentions they might develop. We also have seen that role models that are not necessarily in the home, but people they can read about and emulate. There's one program that uses the book I Am Malala. So those kind of especially peer models that they can relate to in terms of being their age, can be very inspiring and can be more, we've seen that they can inspire action more so than maybe reading about Mother Teresa or somebody who's just really so distant for them. And then one thing that I found really, really important that we tend to overlook is giving young people opportunities to act on those values and intentions and empathic drives that they do have. Especially preteens, they're empathy can really surge at that age. There's a lot of interest that develops in people who are suffering, animals who are suffering, and what can I do to help? And then it's that age when we say, you're too young to help, you don't have the experience, we can't give you these opportunities to volunteer, or don't worry, you can focus on your school and that's what you can do now to develop yourself to be able to do this in the future. But I think that's cutting off potential for purpose for those young people at a time when they could really develop the capacity for purpose by finding or being pointed to ways that they might not have otherwise seen or had access to. Pointing them to a club or an organization that might give them opportunities to act on what is kind of starting to drive them in terms of being concerned about others. Giving them opportunities to volunteer, getting them engaged in collaborative projects with other kids that they can solve problems that they see in the community, and so on. So those are kind of the big ones. And then we've seen with programs that are working in schools, they do kind of follow this framework that I lay out in the book that captures these different pieces. They tend to start by having students reflect on values. What are your personal values? And let's talk about this in the space of the classroom. Let's make the classroom a space where your values and what's meaningful to you can come alive and be shared. That opens a lot of can of worms that I'll, whether or not people should be expecting students to bring what's meaningful and personal to them to the classroom. I know that opens a lot of questions, but it actually has been shown to be very beneficial for a lot of young people. Then from there, having grounded in those values, the next step is looking outward, saying, okay, now look outward to the world you live in, the community. What do you see that matters to you? What is your heart responding to that you see, that you want to be part of, that you want to contribute to, that you want to make better? The third step is that very concrete step of setting goals and understanding how to take the steps to pursue goals, because it turns out that like many of us, young people struggle with the process of setting goals that they can pursue and taking the steps and making the plans to pursue them. So engaging them in that process so that they learn how to do that can be really effective. And then having, again, those opportunities to really take action in the world, whether that's a school improvement project for younger kids, to taking on an internship or volunteering in the community for older kids. Actually taking action is a really important step in developing purpose.
Great, thank you. So right now, during this extraordinary time with the virus, there are a lot of, I mean, most children are at home with their parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of education that's happening at home. So I'm wondering, with all the great things that you just described, is there anything that parents can do specifically right now in this moment to start working with their children on purpose?
It's a really good question. We've got a kind of a confined space, but I think it opens the opportunity for those family discussions or discussions about things, asking the questions about what's going on here and how is it impacting you, and what are you seeing, and actually taking the time to kind of develop those discussions, I think would be a huge opening point for talking about those values and those, how our family responds to this and who we want to be in moving forward through this, finding the positive ways that we can respond to it and not dwelling in the pain, which is there, but finding what are the proactive ways that we can be responding to this. I know I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I know we're having a lot more conversations just because there's a lot more time to do that. And so I think there's a lot more being conveyed, whether directly through conversation and specific questions or just in how we're interacting when we talk about what's going on in the world and being aware of that. The other is seeing, if there's opportunities to influence what they're reading or what they're accessing. And this is a great opportunity to find materials about inspirational young people or role models that they might find inspiration from. And then a third thing is, this is a great opportunity to give kids responsibilities in the household. I know, again, with my own daughter, it's been a lot easier to make, often it's hard to give kids chores and responsibilities at home because you just need things to get done. But now there's a lot of time, a lot of space to say, these are your responsibilities. We're all home. We all need to be here. And here's the role that you can play to make this work. And that's, giving them that sense that they are responsible for how our household and how our family is functioning. Is definitely a foundation for developing a sense of purpose and a sense of what I need to do to contribute to society, if you look outward from there.
Great. And at some point also, I don't want to say life will go back to normal, but we will once again engage in society. We'll all come out of our homes and life will go back to sort of what it was. But when children are going back to school, I mean, everyone's been through this experience, and you can't just start school with, okay, now is how it used to be. We have to somehow acknowledge what everybody has been through. And so I'm wondering if there are things that teachers can do, that schools can do, to take this global experience and guide students towards thinking about purpose. Are there any things you would suggest beyond what you already did about what teachers and schools can do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I agree it's going to be very important. And again, I think that thinking in terms of purpose actually gets us to the same kind of conclusion about what we can do with young children, which is, I think there might be a lot of drive to just get back to normal, get back on track, make sure we're getting into our curriculum and making sure that that's proceeding forward and getting everybody back to normal. And I think that if we're thinking in terms of purpose, we would go back to that idea of giving space for conversations and understanding how this has affected kids and what they're thinking about and what they're feeling and what they're experiencing, and making space for that in the classroom so that what follows in terms of the relationships in the classroom and how teachers are responding to students and the compassion that the students need at that time is going to be both healing for them and also a foundation for supporting purpose through, by connecting that experience to what they're going to be learning as they kind of get back into normal. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm seeing Kate up there. I'm wondering if you want to jump in with questions from the audience.
Yeah, hi everyone, thanks. I do have some great questions and a couple of like comments as well. So I'd like to share those with you. Let's start with an easy one. When will your book be available in an e-version?
Oh, that is a really good question. So I did ask that question when it first came out. That is a publisher question, not a me question. And they said that they sometimes make. So this is Harvard Education Press. It's an academic publisher. So they don't always make the books available in an e-version. But I will let them know that that question came up because I would like to encourage them. They said sometimes they do put their books out in an e-version a year or more after it's been first released. It's been more than a year, so I will definitely say that question came up because I would love to encourage them to do that.
Great. Marilyn said, writing is always a good opportunity to bring forth what we are thinking and feeling. Peter Elbo's random writing is a good tool to use. Parents and children take a few minutes to write randomly and share with one another is another good technique. And then she went on to say, like, in teaching, I've always thought it was important to have a contract with students, either a verbal or written contract, and it involves 3 questions for collaborative action. Who are we? What is worth knowing? And how do we go about learning what we feel we need to know?
That's
and
wonderful.
Those are just some comments that were brought up.
I appreciate those comments a lot because the work that's being done, developed in classrooms right now is definitely work in progress, and there's some wonderful work being done. And the more that teachers especially can inform that work from their own experiences is it's really helpful and it's really valuable. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Great. And then I have another one, and then maybe I bring it back to you, Vicki, until we have more. But this depends on how long you expound on this, Heather. But some really good questions here from Teresa. Is purpose the same as having a mission? And there's like 4 more things. So, or does it precede mission? Is it always driven by an aspiration?
Yeah.
And finally, does purpose involve having a vision? So I'll let you start with the first one. Is purpose the same thing as having a mission, or does it precede mission?
Precede mission. Okay, so this is this is a really good question, and I've heard this question. I've heard this discussed, especially maybe not as much at the individual level, but often it gets discussed at the organizational level. But I can see that it also applies to the individual. I guess it depends on how you're defining both purpose and mission. I don't work as much with the idea of missions, but because I do work on a kind of an individual, I look at individuals, but I would think that purpose would precede mission as I'm thinking about it right now, because it's really that inner motivation that is driving you. And so that I think would need to be the kind of starting point for then establishing what is my mission, which might be the more specific way that I realize or act on it. Mission might be more associated with a cause, and purpose isn't necessarily a cause. Purpose is a drive. It's an inner drive and intention of how to live. So that's how I would distinguish them. But yeah, I'm not sure how people are defining mission, and so that's where I'm a little uncertain about what direction that might go.
Yeah, that makes sense. She said that it's lovely that it includes reflection on core values. And then her last question, just to refresh your memories, does does purpose involve having a vision?
Vision, in what sense, do you think?
I'll see if I'll ask her to
There
see
was
if she
I thought there was a question between the mission question and the vision question.
Yeah, is it always driven by an aspiration?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think because we do get caught up, and I'm really guilty of this, of substituting the word goal, because people understand the word goal instead of intention. But I've been trying to shift back to this idea of intention, because goal and aspiration, while it is important that I think purpose is this kind of overarching idea about how to live or something to accomplish, a lot of people think of purpose in much more modest terms than that, and the way they live their life. I just want to be someone who is compassionate every day. I just want to be someone who's kind to everyone I meet. That can be a purposeful life. It's not aspiration. It's not a big aspiration. It's like maybe a daily aspiration. And then there's also, I also think of it in terms of the arts, or something where you're creating every day or creating consistently. You may not have a far-ranging aspiration or some goal point that you're, a destination that you're reaching for, but it's just in what you're doing every day to develop yourself, or to develop, you want to, for whatever reason, there's a lot of different reasons that would be the purpose, I guess, but it's realized in kind of more everyday intentions, and not so much in this idea of a far-reaching aspiration that you can't accomplish today. You have to wait until you get there to accomplish it.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question just came in. Is purpose passion?
Oh, so I really steer clear of the word passion. For some people, purpose is a passion. It's something that they're passionate about. They find something that they're passionate about, and that's how they realize their purpose. For a lot of us, myself included, passion is really difficult, because you get passionate about something and then you go to do it, and it turns out it involves a lot of drudgery, or it's really hard, or like the actual doing of writing a book, for example, involves a lot of sitting down to write when you don't want to, that's just an example. But passion becomes very difficult when it gets into the nitty-gritty and the day-to-day. So I don't think of purpose as passion. I think of purpose as something that you are willing and able to be committed to, because it reflects who you are. And it reflects the best self that you want to be. And for some really lucky people, that happens in pursuing a passion. But I just don't think it's necessary. And I don't want people to be turned off to the idea of purpose because they don't know what they're passionate about, or they can't find a passion.
Excellent. Thank you for that delineation. That's really good. And also, Teresa said, thanks for the great answers, especially what you said regarding the arts of a daily practice.
Mm.
She appreciated hearing that.
Mm.
So that's what I've got a new one here coming up here. What recommendations do you have for working with students who have experienced or have caused intense trauma in their lives and are living in juvenile detention facilities
Oh my goodness.
or residential homes? Many of these young people have not had many opportunities to develop a clear sense of purpose. How can we help these young people?
Yeah, that is a huge question, and it's really an important question. It's one that I would love to work on. And I don't know, Vicki, if you've come across people who are doing this work in your work. It's almost something that I'm reluctant to speak to assuredly about, because I know that's a very different life experience. One I don't have a lot of familiarity with, one that I'm actually hoping to work on a little more. But I think that based on what we know from school contexts, that giving young people opportunities to talk and be heard about in terms of what does matter for them. And being able to develop that capacity to talk and be heard is really crucial. That we see as a first step in developing purpose. And in the case of kids that you're talking about, it's possible that they haven't had those opportunities to be heard. And I think that's an important first step. And to develop the relationships that can then be kind of supportive, both for developing purpose out of that experience and just being resilient in that from that experience. I don't know, Vicki, have you had experience? Do you know research people who are doing that work?
What I've heard is a little bit what you've talked about. Of course, with trauma work, trauma-informed work, cultivating relationship is absolutely key. So really creating a safe space with trusted adults, trusted mentors is really important. And then yes, giving the children or the teens the chance to explore, to talk about their experience and that sort of thing. The other thing I've read about is providing them with role models of people who do have a strong sense of purpose, particularly people who are coming from their community, people they can identify with, is very important as well.
Yeah. So I know you've been more in the trauma-informed space than I have, so I'm glad I'm reluctant to respond to that question because it's a very important and difficult area. So.
Yeah.
Vicki, I know that you've prepared several questions, but I definitely wanted to get with our audience to be sure that we cover their questions. Did you have another one? And then I can see if there's more that come in.
I do. You don't have any more? Because I do have a couple more questions.
Actually, I'm just going to make this comment that someone just shared. As educators, giving students an opportunity to talk is important, as you say, Heather. Too often we don't ask our students, upper grades, high school and college, we don't ask students what do they think. So she really appreciated that. And I'm going to let you go, Vicki, with a couple more questions then if you have them.
Sure, yeah. So Heather, in your book, you also talk about some myths about purpose. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what those might be.
Sure. We've touched on some of them, I think, because they do come up, and that's why I address them in the book. And one is this idea that we need to find our passion to have purpose. And I really want to make sure it's clear that you don't have to identify what you're passionate about in order to find purpose. Purpose is just who you want to be in terms of being your best self in the world, and what kind of intentions can be an aspiration. But it really is not necessarily what you're passionate about. So many of the things that we're passionate about really lose their luster as we pursue them in the day-to-day. So I don't worry too much about passion, but that is one of the myths, that I have to find a passion. And if I don't know what I'm passionate about, I can't have purpose. Another one is that we can only have one purpose. And this comes out of, I think, how we talk about purpose, because when we give examples, we talk about a single type of purpose, or someone who's doing this and that's their purpose. We tend to kind of narrow it down to this idea of it being a singular thing. And in fact, we can have lots of purposes in our lives. It depends a little bit on the person. Some of us can handle, juggling resources a little better. Like by resources, I mean time. But we might find purpose in our family life, and at the same time find purpose in our career or in our civic engagement. Those things can go on simultaneously, and as long as we have the resources to be pursue purpose in both of those or all of those, that can happen. And in fact, we do see that some of the most purposeful people that we've talked with tend to be very energetic and tend to have a lot of different interests that they're pursuing. And then the third one is one that comes up a lot, especially with educators, and it's really important, which is this idea that purpose is a luxury or a privilege, that only certain people can have access to purpose because there's this idea of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that if we don't have our basic needs met, how can we possibly think about something as lofty as purpose? And I really, if I can get one thing across, I really want to turn that upside down, because what we find is that purpose is actually a resource for people who are might be living in difficult circumstances. That purpose is that drive forward, that thing that gives meaning in life, and that makes, builds stronger connections with the people that are important. And that this idea of saying I shouldn't worry about my students' purpose because I have to worry about their basic needs, their basic educational needs. I actually think that if you're helping them to develop and cultivate purpose, you are giving them the tools and resources that they'll need to make the most of their educational experience and their learning, and find paths through, more positive and proactive paths through whatever circumstances they might be experiencing.
Great. So it looks like we have maybe time for one more question. So, so I'd love to know, Heather, how has this work impacted your life?
So, it's funny. I never really thought about my own purpose, to be honest. I mean, I think I've been asked it the question in that way, which is, so do you have a purpose? Did you always have a purpose? And I never really thought about it until I started doing this work. But what it's really helped me think about in terms of my own purpose is where my own gaps are when it comes to pursuing or cultivating purpose in my own life. In the way we do our research, we identify dimensions of purpose, and that are kind of what I talked about at the start. It's a BTS motivated, it's personally meaningful, it's something that you're acting on, it's a goal. And I found that, and then we say, like, if you have a aspiration or intention, but you're not acting on it, you're a dreamer. If you have a lot of activity that might be purposeful, but you haven't organized it according to some aspiration or intention or something that's meaningful, you're a dabbler. So we've kind of identified these different ways of looking at precursory forms of purpose. And what I discovered through that is that I'm a dreamer. I'm often a dreamer. I tend to set really lofty goals and things I want to accomplish, and I have no idea how to pursue it. I don't know how to take the steps to pursue it. And so doing this work has helped me think about, okay, what I need to do if I want to have more purpose in my life is break down these huge goals. I want to start a school. I can't start a school, so the whole thing disappears and falls apart. But what I've learned is, well, what I can do is identify ways to work with other people to develop a new curriculum, or go to county board meetings where I can support a startup school, or there are ways that I can contribute to that cause or that goal that I have without being overwhelmed by how big it is, how much of a dream it is. So in a way, it's been really helpful for me in realizing my own purpose, because it's helped me see where my own shortcomings are and what I can do to fill those.
That's great. Is there anything else in this last minute that we have that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, please develop those relationships, the trust that Vicki talked about, like with students. I think that's what they need at the foundation: the compassion, the trust, the ability to talk about who they are and who they want to be. For those who are educators, and for those who are parents right now at home, kind of building those foundations is really important.
Great, thank you.
I want to thank you both, Vicki and Heather, for being with us on our program today. I want to thank the audience for the wonderful questions and comments that helped contribute to our discussion today. And we welcome you to join us on future Global Reads. I will save the chat room. I don't think the audience was able to do that, so we're going to try and make that available to everyone, since there's links in there and some great questions and comments that people might want to refer back to. So thank you so much for your time and getting up super early this morning to be with us on the West Coast.
Good, now we're up. Ready to go.
Have a wonderful day. Stay healthy, everyone, and thanks for being here again.
Thank you, Kate. This was really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kate. And thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.